Okay, let's start our evaluation exercises today with this one. In this position, it's white's turn to move. Who do you think has an advantage here? Pause the video to think about it. Okay, so in this position, things are relatively equal because even though white has better center control due to more pawns and more pieces here in the center, it's very difficult to attack black. The black pawn structure is very strong. For example, if I ask you the question, how are you going to add pressure on black now? How are you going to attack him? Then you will see it's difficult to find a way to actually add the pressure on black. So from that point of view, I have to say that white maybe has a small advantage because he's got better development and better center control, but black is doing fine because it's difficult to find any targets in his position. Okay, so I'm going to suggest two moves here. The move pawn to c4 or the move rook f to b1. Compare these two moves in terms of the evaluation criteria and then say which one do you think is better. Okay, let's look at this move first. It takes an undeveloped rook and it develops it, which can't be bad. It must be a good move. However, black can now play knight to d5, put his knight on this knight central square and attack our pawn and our bishop as well. If we save the pawn, he takes our bishop. In other words, he wins a little bit material because remember, a bishop is generally worth slightly more than a knight. And after we recapture, we've also messed up our pawn structure a bit. Okay, so from that point of view, the move c4 would actually be a better move here because it helps us increase our control in the center. And in this case, it helps us control a very important square in the center, preventing black from putting his knight on d5. Okay, so that was our first example. Let's move on to the next one. White's turn to move here. Who do you think has a better position? Use your 5-step evaluation thinking method and then say what do you think. You can pause the video to think about it. Okay, white has a few small advantages in this position that add up to give him quite a bit of an advantage. And the first advantage that he has is in terms of center control. We can see particularly this pawn and bishop supported by the knight gives white a nice hold here in the center, also supported by the rook and the queen. So in the center control evaluation aspect, white is doing quite well. Also in terms of piece development, black has a problem knight here on the edge of the board. The knight shouldn't be here, it should be on f6. It's on the side of the board and it's unprotected. Or as they say in chess, a knight on the rim is dim. Okay, and then another important point is with regards to pawn structure. This pawn is a weakness in black's position. The reason why it's a weakness is black has to use his pieces to defend this pawn. This pawn can't be defended by any other pawns. You see this pawn is already moved up the board. So white is going to add pressure on this pawn. He's already adding pressure with the bishop. The queen is on this file. This rook will probably come in soon. And all to increase the pressure on that pawn. Okay, so that said, I'm going to suggest two moves here. Bishop takes e6 or rook to d1. Compare these two moves in terms of the evaluation criteria and then say which one do you think is better. Pause the video to think about it. So let's look at this move first. Obviously black will recapture us. And now, in terms of material, it was an equal exchange. In terms of piece development, not much changed. But in terms of center control, we actually helped black. We helped him get an extra pawn in the center. And we also help him solve his pawn structure problem because now this pawn is not going to be such a big weakness anymore because it can be supported by the e pawn. Okay, and then I also didn't tell you that this rook has become more active now because it's got an open file. So the move bishop takes bishop is not a very good one from an evaluation point of view because we give black some advantages but we don't take any advantages for ourselves. That's never a good idea in chess. This move on the other hand takes an undeveloped piece and puts it on the open file where we can add some pressure on black's d-file. So this move makes a lot more sense. It improves our position. Now I just want to ask you an interesting question here. If black had to take your bishop, how would you recapture? Would you take with the pawn, with the knight, or the queen? You can pause the video if you want to think about that. Okay, so the important thing that you have to notice here is that we want to add pressure on that d6 pawn. And so therefore, the move taking with the pawn is not a very good idea, because we close up the d-file and we lose a lot of our advantage that way. We want to keep the d-file open, so we want to take rather with a piece. Do we take with the queen or with the knight? Well, either one of them is going to be better than taking with the pawn, but the knight is probably going to be best. Reason for that is if you take with the queen, then black gets a chance to bring his back knight with tempo. You have to move the queen again, and his knight is back in the action, and he gains some time in the process. So instead of taking with the queen, we can probably just take with the knight and keep the option open of opening up this d-file again and add pressure on black's d-pawn. Okay, so that's the evaluation exercises for today, and then I'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers.